Okay, good day to everyone. Good evening to those of you in Israel, and good afternoon to those of you in North America, and also for those of you in between in Europe, also a good afternoon. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow here at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center, and it's my pleasure to introduce, to welcome you to the second webinar in this new series. Before I say more about the webinar, I just want to say on behalf of the Begin Center that this lecture is dedicated to the memory of Barry Lieben, Zichrono Livracha, who passed away in January of last year. Barry was a longtime friend and benefactor of the Begin Center and was wholeheartedly dedicated to the plight of Soviet Jewry. He and his wife Cindy campaigned, protested for the release of prisoners of Zion as early as the 1960s, and Natan Sharansky was one of Barry's personal heroes. And for this reason, the Begin Center has chosen to honor the memory of Barry in this way. Today's webinar, as you know, and as was hinted at in that tribute to Barry Lieben, today's webinar is on the topic of the immigration of Soviet Jewry to Israel and the wider issue of kibbutz galuyot, the ingathering of the exiles. This webinar is the second in this very special series that we at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center are hosting in partnership with the Hidden Light Institute, which is a US-based organization committed to educating about Israeli leadership, and specifically are the producers of an extraordinary new documentary film about the life of Menachem Begin, which will be premiered here in Israel in May of this year, alongside a major symposium, which hopefully, COVID allowing, will take place physically here at the Begin Center in Jerusalem. In the weeks and the months leading up to that symposium in May, we're presenting these webinars every 2 to 3 weeks, each one focusing on a topic connected in some way to the life and the political career or the legacy of Menachem Begin. Menachem Begin was, among many other things, a committed supporter of the fight to free the prisoners of Zion, the Jews trapped in the Soviet Union. And he was active in that struggle for many years before he became prime minister and continued that fight as prime minister. And not only was his concern for Jewish suffering anywhere in the world an absolutely central factor in his thinking, but he himself knew what it was like to be on the receiving end of Soviet oppression, spending 2 years in the Gulag in the early 1940s. His book, White Nights, is about that period. There is, of course, no one that we could have brought today more suitable, more credentialed, or more inspiring on this topic than Natan Sharansky, the most famous political prisoner of the Soviet Union. He really became the spokesman for the prisoners of Zion and the inspiration for political efforts here in the United States, elsewhere, to pressure the communist regime to release its Jews. After successfully immigrating to Israel, he didn't settle for a quiet life. He did the exact opposite. He went into Israeli politics and started a political party for representing Soviet Olim. He became a minister and a deputy prime minister in successive Israeli governments. Following that, or after a brief period, he became the chair of the Jewish Agency for Israel. And today he chairs the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. He's also the author of 4 acclaimed books: Fear No Evil, The Case for Democracy, Defending Identity, and most recently, Never Alone, Prison Politics and My People, which he co-wrote with Professor Gil Troy. We're very honored and privileged to have Natan Sharansky with us. And I also want to give a very warm welcome to Rabbi Stuart Weinblatt, who will be conducting this conversation with Natan Sharansky. Rabbi Weinblatt is the founding rabbi of Congregation B'nai Tzedek in Potomac, Maryland, a vibrant conservative synagogue of approximately 650 families, which he founded in 1988 with just a handful of families. He's president of the Rabbinic Cabinet of the Jewish Federations of North America. He's also served as director of Israel Policy and Advocacy for the Rabbinical Assembly. He's the head of the Jewish National Fund's Rabbis for Israel, as well as chairman of the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition. So I wonder how he gets anything else done, but he does. He's also been an adjunct professor at Wesley Theological College in Washington, D.C., where he taught Jewish history, Bible, and theology. In 2016, the Forward newspaper recognized Rabbi Weinblatt as one of the most inspiring rabbis in America. He's also the author of 2 books, God, Prayer, and Spirituality, and Living in the Shadow of Death, A Rabbi Copes with Cancer, as well as numerous articles and columns. I'm going to hand over now to Rabbi Stuart Weinblatt, and I'll return at the end to read out any questions which you're invited to submit using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So without further ado, Rabbi Weinblatt, please.
Thank you for such a warm introduction, really. It's most embarrassing that my introduction was longer than Natan's, but Natan has been a friend and certainly a hero of mine and of so many of us on this call today. So let me get right down to the opportunity to speak with Natan Sharansky on behalf of those who are here. Natan, as we all know, you came to Judaism as an adult because of the nature of the repression in the Soviet Union. I was wondering, when did you first hear about Menachem Begin, and what did you know about him before you ever got to Israel?
Well, about Menachem Begin, I think Israel first came into my life in 1967. And then when all the world looks on you and says how you guys did it, and you understand that whether you want or not, but everybody on your left and right, friends and enemies, all connect you to Israel, you want to understand what it means. And then in the underground, you start reading the books about yourself, about our history, about Exodus from Egypt, and about creation of the State of Israel. And there, from these first books, I say probably it was the history of Jewish state by Professor Ettinger. By the way, very much stick to the narrative of the Mapai, and very critical, as far as I remember, about Begin as a destructive force. But then you can really understand what an important role this person is playing. And then you read the other books, and you read about Antalena, and then you read that, in fact, he was in Soviet prison. So that immediately makes him much closer. But that was the Begin which entered our life from in the end of 60s, beginning of 70s, not knowing no, but here and there knowing something. When the struggle itself started, and especially when I was arrested, Begin was among the first. It was like just a few months before he became prime minister. But in the very first telephone call, which my wife started doing to political figures in Israel, he was the first who said that he'll do everything what he can. And he really, as Avital discovered, he had many years of struggle, and later he was the one who felt the struggle as his personal struggle. He devoted all his forces as the leader of Jewish state, but also as a person trying to give this feeling of family to every fighting family of the prisoners of Zion. And he was playing a very special role then in our personal story. But yes, as a figure, first as a very controversial figure, and then as the one who continues the legacy of Jabotinsky. We read the books of Jabotinsky in Russian. By the way, those who didn't read him in Russian don't know what a powerful writer he is. And then his ideology of, let's say, liberal Zionism of Jabotinsky, that was that if there was somebody who was present in today's life and who continues this ideology, in our view, that was Begin.
So you alluded just now to the fact that, and you talk about it in your wonderful new book, Never Alone, in which you say that the response of Israeli leaders to the Soviet Jewry movement was, let's just say, somewhat complicated. So what was that all about, and how was Menachem Begin responding? Because and why was it difficult for Israeli leaders at the beginning to get behind this movement?
No. Look, first of all, we have to be fair. Not only they were supportive of the struggle of Soviet Jews. They were those who were trying to keep contact with the Soviet Jews behind Iron Curtain through all the years. And there was a special department created in Israel, secret department, only for keeping contacts with Soviet Jewry. And of course, and Israel was behind the scene in many operations of mobilizing of the world Jewry. But at the same time, there was kind of narrow political, or sometimes we can say narrow Zionist approach. For example, they were ready to support Jews for their Zionist activity. But if for those Jews who are not ready to go to Israel, who want to leave Soviet Union, let's say go to America, they viewed them almost as enemies at some moment. And when I, as some others, very ardent Zionists who insisted that we want to be only in Israel, but we were saying, you, Israel, should not take active steps to close the doors for Jews to any place, because it doesn't give good name to Israel. They were very unhappy with us. And that's when, for the first time, I started having some problems with the authorities. In fact, when I publicly refused to support their efforts to close Hayats, to close organizations which are welcoming Jews coming to America, they warned me that when I come to Israel, I should have no chance to have a absorption center in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. I'll be sent to Arad. So I love that they threatened me with the exile to Arad before I am exiled to Siberia. But that was like a funny episode. The more serious conflict which I had with some Israeli authorities, but I became, in fact, spokesman of two movements, Zionist movement and human rights movement. And for me, this connection was very logical. When I was told that you have to separate, you have to decide, or you're a nationalist or you're a universalist, I thought they're absolutely wrong. If I have any strength to fight for the democracy and freedom, it's only because I found my identity. And in fact, I believe that my involvement to movements helps to broaden the camp of our allies. So here, really, some Israeli authorities felt very strongly that it endangers Zionist struggle. We should not be involved in anything which is connected with criticism of Soviet Union for violation of human rights and not for policy towards Jews. And the conflict went so high that Avital was warned that because I'm crossing all the lines and I'm also becoming member of some signing letters which are in support of human rights in general, the state of Israel will not be ready to defend me if I'll be arrested. And when I was arrested, and Avital immediately went to the authorities, they said they have to wait and to see if some of the accusations about espionage are clear, if I'm accused really for Zionist activity or for not Zionist activity. But it was clear to her, you can't wait even one day. And then she went to Rav Kook, and Rav Kook not only gave a blessing, he said immediately, if one Jew is accused of espionage, it means that all the Soviet Jews are in danger. We have to start fighting immediately. And he made sure that there will be a special group of activists of pupils of Rav Kook who will start traveling with Avital and appealing to different political forces. And one of the first whom they called was Menachem Begin. They called him at 2 o'clock at night. He was in Geneva, and it was the day when I was arrested. And he said to them, thank you for trusting me and calling at 2 o'clock at night. You can, I'll be with you day and night in this struggle. There is no doubt. For him, it was not even a question whether I was not only Zionist, but also fighting for human rights. For him, it was so clear that Zionism and liberalism are united. And above all this, the Jew who wants to go to Israel is accused in high treason We have immediately to mobilize all their efforts. So he said, I'll be with you always. In 2 months after this, he became, 2.5 months after this, he became prime minister. And as he promised, he always was very supportive.
So a question I've always wanted to ask you, and that is, as you write, especially in your book, Fear No Evil, which has the title of Fear No Evil, of course, because of the book of Psalms, you were not afraid of the Soviet government or the Soviet regime. Instead of just arresting you, I mean, forgive me for saying this, but they could have also just, killed you like they've done to others. Were you ever worried about or did you ever occur to you, like, why they didn't just try and shut you up in that way? Because after all, you were a leader of the Soviet Jewry movement and of the human rights movement in the Soviet Union.
Well, first of all, I would say that I was not afraid. Of course, in fact, in Fear No Evil, which was all about my experience of confrontation in prison, I go in details describing how I had to overcome this fear of being sentenced to death. But what helped me to overcome this fear is the fact that the first half of my life, for 20-something years, I was loyal Soviet citizen, living in double thing, meaning in lies, knowing exactly that all your public life is lie, but the real truth you can say only in your family. And then it was Zionism, it was discovery of Israel, discovery of Jewish people, discovery of this unique history that you understand you want to be part of it. That's your family, that's your home. And this image of Israel, which is sending airplanes to the end of the world to save you. When they came to arrest me, Yoni Netanyahu's picture was on my wall. There was no Bibi at that moment. We didn't know that there is such a young boy, Bibi Netanyahu. But Yoni Netanyahu became really the symbol of Israel, which will do everything to help. And that would help you to cross this line of doublethink, of lies, and start speaking your mind freely. The first thing you said, I really want to be Jew, I want to go to Israel. It changes all your life. You can be persecuted and research, you lose your job, but you start speaking freely your mind. And this comparison of two lives, a Soviet slave, even when you're a successful scientist, and free person, even when you're in prison, it was so powerful, it was so clear that all what they proposed me to become a Soviet slave, and they don't want this life. So that what helped me to overcome this physical fear, because you feel that there are things which are more important than your personal life. And the other thing of this absolute confidence that whatever they say, Jewish people and Israel don't stop even for one day to fight for me and for the other Jews. This feeling never alone, that's the name of my last book, this of unity, of connection with Israel and with every Jew in the world. If somebody then was asked me, but do you mean connection with Likud or Marach, with conservative or with reformed or with Orthodox? You will not even understand what it means, because this feeling of connection, of unity, of one family is so strong, and that's what helps you to overcome the fear. Now, you're asking whether they could kill me. Of course, you understand that they could kill me, but very early during interrogations, after arrest, you have to explain to yourself that whether you'll get out alive or not doesn't depend on you. It depends on KGB. So don't try to build on this. But whether you will stay a free person or not, it depends only on you. And so you have to switch in your mind this, what is your real aim? Your aim is not how to survive another day or another year or another 10 years. Your aim is how to live your life as a free person. And when you make the switch, then you fear no evil, let's say it this way.
I've always been so inspired and shared your message that basically it's when you discovered Zionism, Israel, and Judaism that you became who you are, that you became a free person, and that it was liberating in the Soviet system, and that even in the Gulag you were free, and you would tell the guards that they were not. Help us understand a little something about what's going on in Russia today, the relationship between Israel and Russia. Help us understand a little bit better about Putin and what his goal, plans are vis-a-vis Israel and things like that. It's complicated because of also Iran is part of that equation.
Well, first of all, nothing is black and white. Those who are saying that, look, Russia today went back and became like Soviet Union, I say not really. There is no millions of people in Gulag, and there are no millions of people working for KGB. It's very different situation. But no doubt that there is very serious retreat in the level of democracy. That Putin took Russia back to courts which are fully dependent on political and financial corruption. That Putin is very cruel against opposition, independent journalists, and so on. But at the same time, it's important, and at the same time, when there is such a retreat in democracy, we are dealing maybe for the first time in 1,000 years of Russian history when the leader of Russia is not anti-Semite. And here, of course, he has stories, and he told me also the stories why he loves Jews, how in his childhood, the neighbors, how they helped him, how they worked on, and how he helped them. But you know, every anti-Semite has some story about Jewish friends. It's something much deeper. I don't know exactly to explain, but he really decided that Jews, it is good. And he told me in the beginning of his presidency, so now, then I was meeting him a number of times on his initiative. And now, for many years now, we are not meeting because really, then I have to explain to all my friends why I'm meeting such a dictator. But and he also knows that he cannot really use me for his propaganda. But he then told, we discussed many things, Iran, Syria, and Jewish question. And he told me he believes it was the big mistake of Soviet leaders that they thought that independent Jewish life, independent Jewish community is problem for Soviet Union. He felt that that can be good. It can be good bridge to the outer world. And he really will always support the right of Jews to have a Jewish way of life. And those who want to go to Israel can go to Israel. It's interesting that from many conversations, not many, but those conversations which we had between 2000 and 2005, practically everything what he was telling me about Iran and Syria, he was lying. And I knew that he was lying. And Russia did help then to Iran to develop weapons. And she did build platform for many terrorist organizations in Syria and other places. But what he told then about Jewish community is true until this day. As a head of Jewish Agency, I have to say, we have, as a Jewish Agency, a huge operation there. Half of all new immigrants is coming from the former Soviet Union. And we never had problems with authorities on these specific things. And when Putin was coming to Israel, or meeting with the Israelis, he always thinks about Israel as a Russian-speaking Jewish country. But all these words are good for him. He feels that it's like, okay. So that's good. At the same time, that very Putin will do everything that Russia will restore its position as the global leader. And he used Iran. I want already, almost 20 years ago, I told to our government, I believe that all the policy of Russia towards Iran is how to use Iran against America. In order to force America to take us Russians seriously, we will make a threat of Iran real. And also his support of the regime in Syria. So we should have no doubts, with all his sympathy to Jews and to Russian-speaking Jewish state, if his interest in his fight for being superpower means that he will have to support Hezbollah, he will support Hezbollah. If it means to make Iran more powerful, he'll do everything to make it more powerful. Having said all this, he doesn't want to make any damage to Israel, and Israeli leaders have to play between this and this.
Like you said, it's complicated. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about, during the time of the Soviet Jewry movement, it truly galvanized and united Jews around the world in a way which we haven't seen in decades. There were divisions, of course, different approaches, but we had a common cause. Today, it feels so very different. It seems we can't even agree on a definition of anti-Semitism anymore. Just the other day, a few progressive groups, Jewish progressive groups, rejected even the definition which you had a hand in helping craft, if I'm not mistaken, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA, working definition of anti-Semitism. One of the things they say, as I quote, is, "We insist that activists, academics, and all citizens must have the right to express a wide range of political opinions without fear of being suppressed or smeared by the government." And then it says that perhaps the most critical part of all, this includes critiques of the legitimacy of Israel's founding or the nature of its laws and system of government. So sometimes it seems as if we are our own worst enemies and that we don't have the sense of unity that we had in the time of the Soviet Jewry movement. And here, as I said, we can't even agree upon anti-Semitism. Any thoughts you may have about this?
Well, here are two aspects, I would say. One is that, and that's extremely sad, that for the first time in our history, the question of anti-Semitism, which always united all the Jews, the moment there was Bailey's case or Dreyfus case or blood libel in Damascus or any other thing, it united all the Jewish world. For the first time, when we have simultaneously rise of anti-Semitism on the left, on the right, well, those who are demonizing Jews and those who are demonizing Jewish state, people on the left are ready to fight anti-Semitism on the right, and the people on the right are ready to fight anti-Semitism on the left. Somehow, the struggle against anti-Semitism is polarized. And that's very dangerous. And we speak a lot about it in the book. So to the extent to which these organizations are protesting against the fact that this definition was recognized by Trump administration, and they are protesting against specific policy of Trump administration and turn it into their protest against fight of different forms of anti-Semitism, that's very unfortunate. But that's political problem. And I, all the time when I'm speaking to the left, I'm speaking about anti-Semitism on the left. When I'm speaking to the right, I'm speaking about anti-Semitism on the right, because that's what we all have to do to fight anti-Semitism. But there is also another thing which is used by another organization who are saying we cannot accept this definition because it restricts our freedom of speech. In fact, here they are also saying that freedom of speech should not be punished. And I have to say that was exactly the idea of this definition. So let's give all the freedom to the people, or the freedom of speech, legitimate freedom to criticize Jews, to disagree with Jews, or to criticize Jewish state, to disagree with the Jewish state. Of course, everybody has the right, but let's have clear criteria when this criticism becomes anti-Semitic. And criteria is well that when you demonize Jews or Jewish state, when you turn it into kind of Satan, and we have such a long history of it, that's anti-Semitism. When you delegitimize it, speaking exactly about what you just said, when you choose from all the nations, one nation, Stalin chose one nation and said, it is not a nation. Well, not speaking about Hitler. And then one state, which can be accused that it doesn't have a right to exist. It's only, yes, it is anti-Semitism. That's said in this formula. When there is clear double standard, which is not applied to any nation, to the most free nation or the most totalitarian nation, to nobody. And it is applied only to Jews in terms of special attitudes, laws, or it is applied only to Jewish state, that's anti-Semitism. So why, if you really criticize Israel government, if you disagree strongly with the Israel government, why do you need to demonize Israel? Why do you need to delegitimize Israel? Why do you need to apply very different standards? Criticize it exactly as you're criticizing any other country. Yes, I think, yes, it is important to remind to these Jewish organizations that you are free to criticize representatives of Jewish people, whether it is Soros or Sheldon Adelson, you're free to criticize if you disagree. But don't turn it into the demonic representation of evil global power. You are absolutely free to criticize Israel. Everybody in Israel criticizes Israel. But don't deny the right of Israel to exist, or don't turn Israel as Auschwitz, as one of the legitimate critics said. Well, that's pure anti-Semitism. And the fact that Jewish organizations are not ready to understand how dangerous it is to Jews, demonization of Israel. You know, Israel is strong, it knows how to defend it. But demonization of Israel turns into demonization of Jew in every corner of the world. And the legitimization of Israel turns into the legitimization of Jewish people. That's definitely something that we have to insist and explain again and again.
So this is something you've led the cause in many respects of helping people understand the connection between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Do you think maybe we would be better served by different terms, maybe calling it anti-Jewism and anti-Israelism? Have you ever thought about that? Because it's almost as if they become, almost acceptable, so to speak.
So what is the question?
In terms of, do you think we should be using different terms? Do you think anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism are effective terms?
Well, no, there are people who explain that anti-Semitism is, I don't, you know what, those who, the change of the term will not help us because it's people who are bringing political interests or political views into the debate. That was the problem. And the only way is to show again and again how demonization of Jews and demonization of Israel are closely connected, how one hatred is supporting the other. And even if you think, no, let's stick only to Jews, we'll not speak about Jewish state, it's too controversial, then what's happening on the campuses, or what's happening in many other places, it comes back to. So the moment people understand this connection, then yes, people on the right are ready to fight anti-Semitism on the right, and people on the left are ready to fight anti-Semitism on the left, and then we are successful.
So you touched upon something that is the thing I wanted to ask you about next, and that is you've had extensive experience about college campuses, and it seems as if you were subjected to abuse firsthand. You've been on college campuses, you've seen it. And what advice do you have for us, the American Jewish community? Because it does seem as if this is a battle that we send, the vast majority of Jewish kids go to campuses, college campuses. They're not necessarily equipped for what they're going to be confronting with the anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And they get it both from the professors as well as from well-funded organizations. Any thoughts about how we can combat these assaults upon the very legitimacy, the very existence of Israel, which ultimately is intimidating young Jewish kids from being Jewish?
Well, look, that is a problem which is developing for at least for the 20 years that I'm involved. Like in 2003, I told Ariel Sharon, at the time of Second Intifada, and the time when I made visits to 15 American campuses, I said, the most important battlefield for the future of young Jewish generation is American universities. And it was true then, because then for the first time you could see this phenomena of doublethink, or the phenomena when Jews who are sympathetic to Israel but say to me, but we are not ready to sign the letter in support of Israel because we feel that 2 or 3 of our most important professors, important for our career, will not like it. And so we prefer not to be involved. And that's first time when I saw this atmosphere of doublethink, and not in Moscow University, where people were afraid to speak their minds, but in Harvard Business School first time, and then in Columbia University. I was really shocked. But now it's not only about Jews. Now there are so many people who are afraid not to look politically correct, and that's why I prefer not to speak publicly their views. There was like poll in America that 62% of young people prefer not to speak publicly about their political views. Doesn't matter, both on the left or the right. I think it's very dangerous phenomenon. So I would say about your question, there are two things. Something, what we have to expect from universities, and what we have to expect from ourselves, from our families. From the universities, I think the fact that you guys are ready to pay $70,000 a year for your kid to send him or her to school where they will be brainwashed, where there'll be the end of freedom of speech, where they'll start being afraid to express their views because it can influence on their career. That's ridiculous. So think what you demand from the universities, from what you want from the schools to which you are sending your children. But second, when you say, well, our children are not prepared for that atmosphere, for those problems as well. Well, but were they really interested, excited to be part of a Jewish family, Jewish community, Jewish history? Did the schools that you sent to them, did they learn anything about Zionism? Or do they know how to connect exodus from Egypt to your own struggle for the release of Soviet Jews? After all, the parallel is so powerful. You American Jews, for 25 years, were fighting day and night and delivered this unique victory over the biggest empire in the world and brought freedom to millions of Jews who crossed the Iron Curtain and became part of the free world. And you didn't make it part of the story of your family. And then you're saying, well, I don't know, my children somehow feel that it's not good for them to continue being Jewish, but that's not popular. But if they're not coming there as a proud, strong Jews, feeling that their desire to tikkun olam is closely connected to their Jewish values and the Jewish family and Jewish community. So of course, it will be very difficult for them to stand against this.
So we have our work cut out for us. Natan, you resigned, you served in several Israeli governments and you resigned twice. Once from Ehud Barak's government over when he wanted to give up the Golan Heights to Syria and Jerusalem without consulting world Jewry at a time when Arafat said he couldn't do anything without consulting the Muslim world, as you point out. And from Ariel Sharon's government when he talked about the withdrawal from Gaza. And primarily, if I understood correctly what you talked about in your book, it's basically because of the fact that in neither time was there any insistence of any kind of democratization or human rights to be coupled with this in the Palestinian area. Basically, you were vindicated both times. Do you have any hope that there will ever be any human rights concern by the rest of the world towards what happens amongst the Palestinians? Do you have any hope that there will ever be democracy or anything like that, even resembling it among the Palestinians? And without that, is there any hope of any peace for Israel and the Palestinians?
Well, it's true that I resigned twice. I was in 4 governments and resigned twice. As I said, when Bibi proposed me to go back to politics, I said, Bibi, I was in 4 prisons and I never resigned. I was in 4 governments and twice resigned. Probably something's wrong with me being in politics. That's how I became the head of Jewish Agency. But it's interesting that though then I was condemned as a right-wing extremist, and the New York Times and many other newspapers were writing awful articles condemning me. Today, if anybody will read my letters of resignation, my articles, my statements, where I was explaining why I'm absolutely against Oslo from the very beginning of it, and why I'm against disengagement as the way to create the biggest terrorist organization in the world. In fact, left-wing liberals will have not a one word of criticism about these statements, because it's all about how we Israelis, with the support of the free world, are trying to impose awful dictatorship on Palestinians, or are ready to help them even to build a terrorist state in hope that it will bring us peace. And I was always explaining that it will be that all these steps will be very bad for Jews and extremely bad for Palestinians. And there is no way that it will build peace. And the fact that few years after, everything what was written there in my statements really happened, unfortunately, really happened, doesn't change the situation that I'm still viewed as a right-wing extremist who, when the world was on the right side of history, going to the peace, I was not ready. That's ridiculous. That's unfortunate. That shows that we are not ready to learn the lessons. On the other hand, I have to say, I believe Israelis are learning the lessons. And the fact that today, well, we have these Abraham Accords, which are not with democracies, but it's not that we are imposing these dictatorships. We are simply accepting them as they are, provided that, as it is made in all these agreements, that now we start together trying to build peace from the bottom, on the people-to-people level. So now all things that I was writing about, that we need urgent Marshall Plan for Palestinians, that Palestinians have to be taken out of refugee camps, that independent economy in Palestine connected to the free market and not to corrupt, dependent to corrupt leadership should be encouraged. All this, we are in the beginning of all this happening. And only when civil society cannot be imposed on Palestinians. Unfortunately, only dictatorship can be imposed. Civil society has to be encouraged to be built by Palestinians from the bottom up. And that is my hope, that that's what will be happening. That will be the real beginning of the peace process. As I was writing in my letters of resignation on my proposals to Sharon and to others, let's start from helping the Palestinians to build civil society. Only elections after a few years of building such society can bring leaders who really are interested in the well-being of their people. And then we can have real negotiations and real agreements, because then both sides will be interested in the well-being of their people and not how to use their people to destroy us.
So I think it's important for us to move a little bit from these issues to your work in the Jewish Agency and work with the Jews in Israel and the Jews of the diaspora, which became a focus of your work. Any thoughts about the growing gap? I mean, we've touched a little bit upon some of those problems, but any particular thoughts about where we go from here vis-a-vis the relationship of the Jews in Israel and Jews in the diaspora?
I don't think I touch this a little bit in the book. I touch a lot in the book. It's because it's one of the major, in fact, that was the reason for me writing the book, all this debate that I'm diverging. One side believes that the other side is betraying Jewish values, and this side believes that they're betraying Jewish state. And but when you look from three different directions, as I could look at this from my 9 years in prison, and then from my 9 years as a minister of Israeli government, and then my 9 years in the Jewish Agency. So when you look from these three different directions, you can see that the bottom line, our desire to continue as one family, our journey in history, is bigger and stronger than all these disagreements. Only what it means that we have to start listen, not accepting, but understanding the arguments of the other side. And the fact that American Jews are saying, how it can be that you hated president whom we loved and you love president whom we hate. And they don't want to listen. If Israel is doing this, it is absolutely wrong. On the other hand, there is Israel who says how it can be that you automatically, when when we're talking about the most fundamental security of the state of Israel, you, between loyalty to your president and loyalty to the security of the state of Israel, you're choosing loyalty to your president. That is, in fact, the bottom line of bewildered feelings of the betrayal. And of course, there are some other issues like relations with non-Orthodox Jewry and full non-understanding of so many Israelis why it is important for world Jewry, and non-understanding of world Jewry, or many world Jewry, why Israel has to follow only the orders of the Orthodox chief rabbinate. You know, it's interesting that as we try to show in the book, all these phenomena have their explanation. Every side is true in bringing this to the debate, but it's not enough to raise your voice in the debate. It's very important also to listen and understand that the other side also has that logic. And then we have to see how we can, keeping our disagreements, nevertheless, to continue our journey together, trying to, where we can, to cross the bridges. I don't think that we will never be on the same positions, even about such important thing as deal between America and Iran, or of course on such important deal as conversion and the Kotel. No, we will not be on. And we try to show in our book why you cannot expect that simply the other side will accept your arguments. But we can expect the much more understanding of the situation and patience and readiness to express solidarity wherever we can.
And as you know, that's one of the reasons why you've been very encouraging and supportive of the organization I founded, the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition.
Yeah.
And find ways in which rabbis can work together and achieve greater understanding as well. I'm going to ask you one other question. I'm going to turn it over to Paul, who has a couple of questions from the audience. And then after that, I have one last question for you. So, Natan, before we leave this, and that is that this is obviously a difficult time in the United States, difficult time in Israel as well, with the upcoming election there and all of the anti-Bibi demonstrations going on there. Here in the United States, of course, just last week, we saw the siege upon the Capitol, the impeachment trial that proceedings that are going on right now. Any particular words you want to say about the contemporary situation in Israel and or the United States? I'll turn it over to Paul, and I'll have one last closing question.
Well, what concerns me about the United States was its polarization. Its polarization of the cancel culture on both sides. When really the leader of America is demonstrating such a neglect to the fundamentals of the democracy on one hand, canceling the arguments of the practical of everybody. On the other hand, when the indignant opposition thinks that it's okay that few people on Twitter will decide what should be this freedom of speech. So there are some very dangerous precedents are happening, and all this is the result of this very deep polarization, which, and I'm writing about it many years, which is in the foundations is polarization between the world of freedom and democracy and the world of identity. And in fact, Jewish people and Israel have a very unique role in history, how to keep our desire to belong and our desire to be free, our individual freedom, how to keep it together. And that's absolutely urgent challenge for America, because America, after all, with all the problems, is the leader of the free world. We don't have another leader. I'd like now to have a better leader, but we don't have. And probably in the next 100 years, we will not have another leader of the free world. So we need that this leader will overcome this awful gap of canceling one another and try to keep their life together. As to Israel, first of all this, when I hear all the time comparisons that we have Trump, you have Netanyahu, and so and disagreeing with so many things about behavior of Trump, and recognizing so many great things which the Trump administration, unique things which Trump administration did for Israel and in fact for peace process. So I deny this comparison. You know, in this book I have also a lot of criticism, but I always say, you know what, compare coronavirus, how your administration dealt with the problem of coronavirus, and how Israel government. And the fact that today Israel is by far ahead of all the world in vaccination, and it goes like unique military operation, and all the people of Israel participate in it. A lot of credit goes to our leadership, with all the criticism about. I'd like America to have also such a strategically thinking leadership as we have. On the other hand, yes, we in Israel also have definitely clear on both sides these elements of cancel culture, where all these demonstrations who in fact say we want Prime Minister to be replaced not through elections, but through demonstrations. There are clear voice of people, why do you need elections? On the other hand, you can see, why do you need court when you have elections? People said their opinion, why do we have to listen to the judges? It's all elements of this cancel culture, which are very non-productive. But look, I'm very optimistic about Israel, because I think that our inner connection, our inner dynamics, our feeling of responsibility for our history is so, our adjustment to dealing with emergency situations is so deep. That's why I think in medical terms, in economical terms, and in the end in political terms, we will do much better than the other parts of the world.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Natan, for those wonderful comments so far. There's a number of questions. We won't have time for all of them. There's an interesting two-part question here. One of the parts is addressed to you, Natan, and one is addressed to you, Rabbi Weinblatt. The first part to you, Natan, is, well, I'll ask both together. To Natan Sharansky, how has the relationship between Russian Jews and Israel evolved? I assume he means Russian Jews within Israel, the Olim from the former Soviet Union. And to Rabbi Weinblatt, how has the relationship between Russian Jews in the United States evolved with regards to support for Israel based on your leadership in the US, your knowledge from that? So maybe if Natan can go first.
Well, look, as the one who was fighting a lot for the rights of young new immigrants, who we created our political party just because we were very concerned about tension between 1 million of new Olim and Israeli society. And as the one who recognized that there are still problems which Israel as a society faces as a result of this Aliyah, I have to say integration of Russian Aliyah into Israel society is absolutely unprecedented in world history. You will not find another example of the country which absorbed 20% or 17% of its population in few years, and in one generation, in the same generation, the average income of these people will be on the level of the average income of the Israelis, and who are integrated in medicine, in science, in the army, in all these fields. It doesn't mean that there are not still problems which can be characterized as Russian problems, but in fact, I don't think that not only the next generation, but even the same people who came 20, 25 years ago, 30 years ago from the former Soviet Union, they feel themselves, most of them, they feel themselves Russians. They do feel themselves Israelis with the Russian origin, but what is okay, because there is no such a thing as abstract Israeli. Every Israeli has roots in some Jewish communities. So it's very good. In fact, it's unfortunate that some of the good traditions, Russian Jewish traditions, are disappearing. But in general, I think it's a huge success. This integration is a huge success.
Wonderful.
To the United States, the story is still to be told. There are Russian Jewish confederations, and I've met with some of them who are getting involved in the Jewish community, getting involved, just as now there is an Israeli-American Council, which did not exist 5-10 years ago. And so it is that we're beginning to recognize the diversity of the American Jewish community, the plurality of it. And just as we're now also recognizing Black Jews as well. And so I think that's part of that same story there. But I can't really speak too much to the specifics of the question. So I'll move on to let you ask the next one.
Okay, so I'm going to...
I can, you know what, I can add, as the one who was dealing a lot as the head of Jewish Agency, we have approximately 700,000 Jews in America and Canada whose first language was Russian. And we have approximately 700,000 American Jews whose first language was Hebrew. And these two groups, yes, they have a problem because they are falling between the chairs. Very often their Jewish identity doesn't have appropriate Jewish institutions which are appropriate to the other types of identity. And as a result, the danger of assimilation there is bigger. But on the other hand, there are some very good efforts, and Rabbi Stuart is one of those who are making these efforts to bring them inside Jewish community.
Okay, I'm going to ask one last question, and you can keep the answer short because you've touched on it to some extent. But there were a few questions about sort of the current the problems within the Jewish community in the United States, I suppose, but also elsewhere, and the younger generation that are either ambivalent towards Israel, maybe similar to some of the people that Rabbi Weinblatt was referring to who question the definition of anti-Semitism. But there's a specific point that one of our questioners made about where is the ethic of sacrifice, the sacrifice that young Jews had when they were standing up for the Soviet Jewry movement in the United States and elsewhere. Where's I'm going to read what he says, the sacrifice to defend Jewish honor, especially on college campuses, the willingness to stand their ground, and when necessary, return fire. What's happened to that? And how, I guess, how might we bring it back?
Well, I'll say, look, again, everything begins from the family. And that is the first place where Jews have to get this feeling why it is important, why it is interesting, why it is exciting, why it is very meaningful to be part of Jewish history, of Jewish people. It is the family which has to give you first feeling that when Israel is in danger, all of us are in danger. So the fact that there is no such a high feeling of self-sacrifice, one of the reasons because there is no feeling that there is real danger. And I have to say that many of the American Jews who became very active in struggle for Soviet Jews and who rediscovered their Jewish identity, because they realized, they were convinced, they were explained what that there is another Shoah. In fact, it was Elie Wiesel who was first explained that there was one Shoah in our generation, there can be another Shoah. Millions of our people will disappear if we will not fight for Jews behind the Iron Curtain. And that's something which was helping the people to understand the importance of this heroic standing. I think we can see among the young students, especially among young Jewish students, their readiness to sacrifice everything for the sake of better world. Tikkun olam, it is the second thing. What is important is really to explain to these young people, and again, it starts from the very early age, that if you want to change the world for the better, it's great. It's absolutely great, but it will need a lot of strength. And you will not find this strength from anywhere except from your identity, from your people, from your state. So there are many programs which are trying to use Israel to strengthen Jewish identity. And Birthright is one of them. And here is the word to mention about great philanthropist, Sheldon Adelson, who turned this small project into the huge global project. But and there are many other kilim tools for giving this feeling of pride, for strengthening this feeling of identity. But it's only tools. Whether you will take them or not, whether you will use them or not, from the family and then the school, and then it depends on each of us. And here, no wise advice from the top will not help. It all has to come from the bottom. Stuart.
Thank you, Natan. So last question, actually, one from my shlicha, who asked, and that's one of the programs that you started, of bringing shlichim here. On a personal level, just to think about your journey from having been totally devoid of Jewish life, then to Jewish life, then to be in a Soviet prison, and ultimately to serve in four Israeli governments, going back to Russia as a minister, and then serving as the head of the Jewish Agency. It's just an amazing kind of a thing. On a personal level, do you ever just stop and say wow and look at the journey you've been on?
No, well, for our analyzing the journey, we have next world. Alam Rabba. We have to enjoy life. I keep enjoying life. I succeeded to enjoy life, even being in prison, enjoy life of the free person. It was more difficult to enjoy life when you are minister, but I still found the ways to enjoy it. And I enjoy it now. And you mentioned Shlicha. You know what is so good about Shlichim, why I love Shlichim, why I continue now, when I retired from Jewish Agency, I continue to be the head of the school for Shlichim, and I really am very proud how we increased while I was the head of Jewish Agency, our Shlichim increased in number, in quality, and became 10 years younger than before. And I'm very proud of it. But you know what is so good about our Shlichim? That they are maybe the only young people who feel themselves Israelis in diaspora and who feel themselves representatives of diaspora of Israel, who feel these two worlds, who know these two worlds. And that's exactly what we need. We need all the time, as I make comparison in my book, how in Panshexel I was playing chess all the time. And you're playing with white, and then you find the way to win, and then you turn the board, and then you're playing for the black, and you prove that game, and you again try to find the way to win. And at some moment, it doesn't matter, you're white and black and white and black, but it's all these pieces are your allies in this fighting for survival. And so all my life I tried, and I'm happy that I had this opportunity to turn this chess book, thinking for Israel, for the interests of Israel, and what you expect from world Jewry, but then to turn this chessboard and think about world Jewry, what they are expecting from Israel. And at some moment, you feel, after all, it doesn't matter. They are all parts of the same family, of the same struggle. And when you feel like this, you're becoming much more optimistic. And the life is much more interesting.
Well, you've certainly had a fascinating life. You've been an inspiration to so many, including myself. You truly are a wonderful teacher, and I've learned so much. I want to highly recommend to anyone, if you haven't read Natan Sharansky's books, whether it's his first autobiography, Fear No Evil, his book Defending Identity, his book Never Alone, any of these are very, very inspiring. Aside from the fact that Natan Sharansky has one of the finest senses of humor of anybody I've ever met, including the story that I love that he tells when he was being tailed by Russian agents in Moscow, and the KGB guys were worried they were going to lose him. So they jump into the cab with Natan, and he makes them split the cab fare with him. So your chutzpah is unbelievable. And in that spirit, I want to ask you a question my son suggests I ask you, and that is, Israel's now in its third lockdown. We've had this terrible pandemic. People can't go out. Here people have been in quarantine and lockdowns and all kinds of things. You were in a Soviet prison for 9 years, and you were in isolation during part of that time, in solitary confinement. So what advice do you have to us about how we deal with our lockdowns and our confinements and our pandemic in that context?
Well, I gave these advices at the very beginning of Corona, my 5 advisors, which, by the way, thanks to internet, this 5-minute video was seen by more people than all my books together were read. So that is not asking what they were writing books. But the advice were very simple. They are all taken from my imprisonment. Don't forget that you're part of bigger army, and you have your task, and the victory depends on each of you. Second, don't forget that you're part of much bigger story. It's so interesting, so exciting, part of Jewish history. Then don't lose your sense of humor. Laugh on everything what is here. And through internet, you can have all these jokes, everyday jokes in English, Russian, Hebrew, about pandemic, and about, so laugh on yourself, laugh on others. and use your hobbies like I use chess in my head and use Zooms, but also very important, don't feel yourself dependent on things which don't depend on you. Don't try to put plans, okay, in 2 weeks it will be finished, I'll go to Israel or I'll go to Paris. It doesn't depend on you. Make plans which fully depend on you. Be tough on yourself. Okay, in the next month I now can learn 1 more language, or I can read 10 books which I wanted to read and I didn't have time. So, and then do it, and then you will feel well about it. So exactly like in prison, I decide I'm not building plans where they will physically survive. But I can build plans that I'm a free person and I'll say no to KGB. And every day I felt very good about myself. So feel good about yourselves. Make tough projects on your future and fulfill them.
What a great note for us to end on. Thank you so much. Back to you, Paul and Natan. It's great to see you, and keep smiling and keep inspiring.
Thank you. All the best. A lot of health to everybody.
Thank you.
And take your vaccine. I took already.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Natan Sharansky. Interesting and inspiring as always. And thank you, Rabbi Weinblatt, for putting the questions and for making the conversation flow so nicely. Thank you all, everyone who attended. You'll see that I wrote in the chat a link to register for our next webinar, which is taking place in 2 weeks' time on the 27th of January. And that will be looking at the extraordinary developments in Israeli technology, which really got the spur that they needed after Menachem Begin became prime minister, and he opened up the Israeli economy to privatization and the free market after 4 decades of a socialist economy. And we've seen the fruits of that development of Israel as a technology and high-tech powerhouse. And we're going to be specifically looking at with some experts the development of water technology in Israel and what that means for Israel's contribution to peace, both peace and security in the region. 2 things which, of course, were very important and integral to the leadership of Menachem Begin as well. So you can go to that link, which you'll find in the chat. My email address is also there, paulg@begincenter.org.il. You can drop me an email to join my mailing list, in which you'll not only get all the information about the webinars, but also about the weekly events in English that I host here at the center. And I also wrote the email address for Rabbi Weinblatt for those of you that wish to contact him after this sterling job that he's done for us today. Okay, so I'm going to thank you all again. I'm going to wish you all a good day or good evening, depending where you are. Stay healthy. Let's all hopefully get through this and get the vaccinations that we need. And I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks for the next webinar. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.